Hey everybody, it's Safi and Marco Dish Out on Movies, the only movie review show on YouTube to review movies in terms of food. It's just Marco here once again, and I decided to do another one of these ranking the monster performance videos. I might not do it for The Mummy because I haven't really watched those movies very closely, and then I might do the Wolfman or Werewolf movies, but that's another one where I wish I could, say that I've seen them more closely. But I have seen the Frankenstein movies over and over. I owned a lot of these movies on VHS as a kid, and I just watched them all the time. And I thought it would be really fun to do this right after the Dracula video. Technically, I was supposed to review Peter Pan and Wendy today, but I just thought I don't want to, so I'm not going to. At least right now. I don't want to be like these YouTubers who are like, there are certain YouTubers, they're really anti-SJW, quote unquote. But then they're actually more excited for these SJW movies to come out than the actual people who like these movies and want to see them. Like, you'll see these YouTubers and you know who they are. And they just have like 1,000 videos, they're all the same. They're like just wah, 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 wah. And it's like, I don't like doing that. So I thought that this would be a more fun thing to do and not be like a whiny complaining video. So number 17 is the guy from Revenge of Frankenstein. Now this movie, it's the second one in the Hammer Frankenstein series. A big thing to consider with these movies is that they purposefully emphasized Dr. Frankenstein instead of his monster in all of the movies, basically. The point is that Dr. Frankenstein is evil and that, he's the real villain. It's like a flip-flop, whereas in the Universal ones, it's always, oh, look, Doctor creates monster and the monster's, the monster. He's the villain of the story. But in the Hammer ones, it's a bit different. Revenge of Frankenstein, I really do not like. It's awful. Or at least I remember it being just completely boring and unmemorable. In fact, I can't even remember this monster from Revenge of Frankenstein. I can't even... He's just, there. I think he's only in the movie for, 5 seconds. But then the whole point is at the end, Dr. Frankenstein, escapes, and it doesn't really even matter. So he was not a very good monster at all. Although I know some people might like him. Number 16 is Frankenstein Unbound. This is a movie that I thought was very good, but the monster, he doesn't look so good. He has a very weird, fake 1990s look to him. I like the concept of the skin pulled back. You can see on the face all these it's the skin on his face is pulled to stretch it out or something. I think that's kind of cool. Other than that, he looks terrible. I can't even really remember much about him in the movie. Number 15 is Evil of Frankenstein. This one is a complete disaster. I mean, a big problem with the Frankenstein movies and the Frankenstein adaptations is that they just can't get off of Universal. They just can't get off of that classic interpretation, even though that interpretation, it was all created for that movie. Like, in the book, it's very vague and it's very broad, the way that, you could kind of interpret this monster and how he was created in a lot of different ways. And for some reason, people just aren't capable of doing that. So a lot of Frankenstein monsters suffer because they're too much like that Universal movie. And then you have the fact that Universal will sue anyone who uses the image of that Frankenstein without permission. So for the first couple of movies, Hammer had to do something very, very different, but still they just kind of copied in certain instances. And this was a movie where Universal actually went along with Hammer and they made this joint creation, I guess. And it's one of the worst looking monsters I've ever seen. It just looks like some weird old man mask or something. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. It's, in the movie too, he's not really much of a character. He just does whatever people want him to do. He's really like a trash Frankenstein monster. Number 14 is Horror of Frankenstein. This is one where I feel bad because the actor is Darth Vader. And he did a great job in the role. He has these piercing eyes. And he just, he widens his eyes and he looks very scary. The problem is that his creature design is terrible. Because in this movie they were trying to do like a realistic interpretation where it's like, oh look, he has a muscular man's body, and so it was also kind of trying to appeal to the 1960s 1970s hypersexuality. So it was not very good except for like his acting, and the movie was terrible too. I mean, it was just that's one of the worst Hammer movies. Number 14 is Frankenstein Reborn. Speaking of another pointless movie, this is a full moon movie where they were planning on like rebooting all the classic monsters. And so this was one where he's very skinny and scrawny, and it's another one where they're trying to do the Universal one without getting sued. And I do kind of like the makeup. I mean, it looks a lot better than some of the others on this list. But this monster, he was very, very unremarkable. The movie was basically the the niece of Frankenstein. She's like taking bread and water out to Frankenstein in the forest the whole movie. And, it was just not very interesting. Number 13 is The Monster from Hell. Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. This is one where I don't have a clue at what the fuck they were thinking. I mean, he looks like an ape person, like a weird, like a gorilla man or something. I really don't like this interpretation of the character. And then number 12 is Frankenstein and Me. This was one where the monster, he very much just serviced the story. So very mediocre. The movie was very good, but just these monster designs, they were very cheap, and they really weren't very good. Oh yeah, I forgot the one from Wishbone. What's the next one? Number 11 is Glenn Strange. You know, this guy has been in like 3 whole Frankenstein movies, or 4, 3. I just think that he's okay. You know, he's pretty overrated, in my opinion. I think that he's a little bit too skinny, and just his whole look is very fake. Like, he basically just wears like a mask, and he's got like a bunch of padding and stuff, and you know, he's not very good. Number 10 is the Mad Monster Party Frankenstein. This was another one where he's just okay. It's another one where he's kind of like the Universal one, but kind of not. He's got a bald head. Not very interesting. But he does work well in the movie. He does service the movie very well. Number 9 is Christopher Lee. This was the prime example of, we really wish we could just use the Boris Karloff look, but we can't, so this is what we're doing instead. There's a really great scene where the monster pulls his bandages off and he growls at Dr. Frankenstein. Other than that, this monster is bull. He's got a couple of interesting features, like the flesh on him like looks torn up and gross, and you know, he's bleeding, and he's got this like kind of greenish skin. Other than that though, like, he doesn't really do much because, you know, the doctor is the villain of the movie too. Underrated is Frankenstein, you know. He has a couple of great moments in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. I really thought that, you know, he had some good facial expressions. Like, instead of just being and just being very generic, you know, he makes these facial expressions like he did for Dracula, and it really worked for me in this character. The biggest problem, though, I have is the whole walking thing that he does, which has become iconic. You know, it's funny that people, whenever they talk about Frankenstein, they always hold out their arms in front of them. That was all due to Bela Lugosi doing this in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And it's actually because he's blind. You know, in the last movie, it was like Igor, and Igor wanted to be turned into Frankenstein because he thought he wouldn't be blind anymore. And then instead, he's just a blind Frankenstein monster. And so that's why he's holding his arms out. You know, it's like people don't even realize that. Number 8 is the Monster Squad. This is another one where he just services the story. And he's at a point in the story where it feels like he's already had his movie series, you know. It doesn't feel like, based on this, I'd like to see his own movie. However, he did do a good job. I love the makeup. I loved his walk. I loved the way that he talked in the movie. I loved how he helped the main characters. I guess we're at number 5. Whoops. Number 5 is Peter Boyle. Although I do not like Young Frankenstein at all, I think that Peter Boyle is really good at Frankenstein because he has the perfect, like, weird head shape and weird tall body shape, and, you know, he has the perfect appearance for a Frankenstein monster. And he does a really good job. But it's another Renfield situation where I kind of wish that I could see like a serious version of this interpretation. Number 4 is Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. This is one where he's actually like purposefully like a smart, badass character. There's this whole story where he was Frankenstein's partner or just like a colleague, and he has the secret that Dr. Frankenstein needs, but he is like a vegetable, so Dr. Frankenstein puts him in a new body, and then the new body, he actually battles Dr. Frankenstein and fucks him up and kills him. And he is the greatest. He is just so cool. And he is so unlike the other interpretations. Like, this was the one where instead of wanting to be like Universal, they just did their own thing. Another one where they did their own thing, number 3, Frankenstein Created Woman. This was one where the main character, it's just about her getting revenge the whole movie. But once again, it's another wildly different interpretation. To the point of where, she is clearly like her own character. Like, you probably wouldn't have even had to call this movie Frankenstein unless you just, really wanted to have it be a part of the series. And I really like her, and I like the acting and the way that she's so different from all the other portrayals in the whole Frankenstein mythology. Or, history, I guess. Number 2 is the Monster Mash Frankenstein. I know that what people are saying, but trust me, he's really awesome. He's really badass. I think he has a cool design. It's kind of like a cross between Universal and then just doing its own thing. He has this really awesome part in the movie where he's like chopping this person up, or chopping up like a monster, and then throwing all the body parts in jars and stuff. Like, there's a really cool scene with that in the laboratory. And I really love his relationship with the kid in this movie. And the kid basically helps Frankenstein get back to normal. And he's just so cool. Number 1 is obviously Boris Karloff. The funny thing is that, first off, you wouldn't have even had this interpretation if not for Jack Pierce, the makeup artist. He was the one who came up with the whole look for this character. And he did a perfect job. And it's just such an iconic look for a monster. It's such a perfect performance that Boris Karloff gave. And then in the second one, he's just as good, if not even better. So I really couldn't picture putting anyone else at number 1. It's just unfortunate that no one has really risen to the occasion and tried to really, really do their own thing and make their own badass Frankenstein. Instead, everyone's just trying to do Karloff. There's got to be some element of Karloff. And that's the key mistake. Unless it's like Universal and they're just trying to, make more cash grab Frankensteins, I really think that people should have tried to do their own thing and make a really cool, unique monster that made sense. I think that it's really unfortunate that we haven't gotten a Frankenstein better than Karloff, because, that was like 1930 or 1931, and it's now 2023, so it's almost 100 years, and it's like still nobody has even done it. The only way that they really did it with the Hammer movies is they did like a swap, where they made Frankenstein kind of sympathetic, and they made Dr. Frankenstein the villain. That doesn't count. To me, you have to make a true Frankenstein movie where the monster is the villain and the doctor is the doctor. Even though the monster's the villain, the fact that the monster's the villain is all due to the doctor. So it's like, I don't get this thing where it's like, oh, who's the real villain? It's like, it's the monster. But then that, the doctor, he created him, so he's pretty bad too. And then I think another thing is the whole look. People really struggle with makeup, and they struggle with like how to make the perfect Frankenstein monster. Instead of making him like really weird, or instead of making him like really normal looking, I don't know. It's like people have to come up with something that's really original and good, instead of just making the same mistakes over and over again. Overall, though, these are all pretty good movies. I mean, there's way less bad Frankenstein movies than there are bad Dracula movies. Dracula has, countless bad movies, and that's not even counting just like vampire movies in general. At least Frankenstein doesn't have any like Twilight versions, like there's no Twilight where it's like about a woman who loves a Frankenstein. So anyway, please like this video, comment, tell me what you thought of the rankings and how you would rank the Frankenstein monsters. And then please subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more honest rankings. Because I might do a Wolfman one. I don't think that there's any others that I could do, though, until I catch up on watching all the monster movies. So goodbye, everybody. See you soon.